They tried to crush his spirit under the weight of the world, but they forgot that titanium only grows stronger under pressure. Witness the epic tales of survival and the ultimate power of a human will that simply refuses to break. Click subscribe now and find your own strength today.
My son told his business partners I died years ago. He said it at a dinner I paid for, at a table I reserved, in a suit I bought him for his birthday. I found out 3 weeks later, not from him, from a woman named Patricia, who worked the coat check at the restaurant and recognized me from a photo my son kept on his desk. She thought I should know. She was right. 2 days after I found out, my son called. Not to come clean. Not to apologize. He needed me to co-sign a $2.1 million loan for his startup company. His exact words, "Dad, this is the opportunity of a lifetime, and I just need your signature. You owe me this much. You owe me this much." From the son I raised alone. From the son I worked 18-hour days for. From the son who told a room full of people his father was dead. Before I tell you what I did next, let me back up, because you need to understand who I am and how we got here. My name is Robert Calloway. Most people call me Bob. I'm 63 years old, and I run Calloway Automotive, 4 full-service repair shops across central Ohio, with a 5th location opening in the spring. Last year we turned just over $1.9 million in net revenue. I employ 31 people, most of them locals, several of them men who came out of the same system I did. Because here's what my son told his investor friends. I was too embarrassing to mention. I aged out of foster care in Columbus at 18 with $40, a backpack, and a bus pass that expired at midnight. No family, no safety net, no plan except to not end up on the street. I spent my first 2 years sleeping on a friend's couch and working at a transmission shop on Morse Road for a man named Earl Briggs, who paid me $8 an hour and taught me everything he knew. Earl didn't care where I came from. He cared whether I showed up and whether I paid attention. I showed up every single day for 4 years. I paid attention to everything. By 26, I had saved enough to buy a used hydraulic lift and rent a bay from a gas station on the east side. I worked nights and weekends out of that bay for 3 years while keeping my day job at Earl's. By 30, I had my own shop. By 42, I had 3. By 58, I had 4 in a retirement plan that didn't depend on anyone but me. I also had a son. Derek's mother, Gail, left when he was 4. Not her fault. We were young and wrong for each other in every way that matters. We stayed civil for his sake, and I raised him, mostly alone, in a 2-bedroom house on the north side. I coached his Little League team. I drove him to SAT prep on Saturday mornings. I paid for the private high school that got him into Ohio State. And then I paid for Ohio State. And then I paid for the MBA program at Northwestern that he said would change everything. It did change everything, just not the way I expected. At Northwestern, he met Serena. Old money from Connecticut. The kind of family that has a hyphen in their last name, and a summer house they call a cottage that sleeps 16. She was smart and polished, and she looked at my work boots the first time we met the way you'd look at something you'd stepped in. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. After the MBA, Derek went to work at a consulting firm in Chicago. Good salary, expense account, all of it. He and Serena got engaged after 8 months. He called me from a restaurant. I could hear the background noise. Glasses clinking, and told me the news. I told him I was proud of him and asked when I could meet her parents. He said they were planning to do a small dinner soon, just the 2 families getting to know each other. That dinner never happened. I stopped asking after the 4th time it got rescheduled. The wedding was in Newport, Rhode Island. I was there. I sat in the 4th row on the groom's side, alone, in the suit I'd bought specifically for that day. I shook hands with Serena's father, who called me the mechanic for the entire reception and never once asked my last name. I gave a toast that Derek had pre-approved word for word. I smiled in every photograph. I drove back to Columbus the next morning and told myself this was what success looked like. Sometimes your kid outgrowing you, moving into a world you don't belong to, and loving him anyway. I kept that story going for 2 more years. Then Patricia told me about the dinner. Derek had been presenting to a group of angel investors at a restaurant in Lincoln Park. 14 people. Prospective funding for his new venture, a logistics software platform he'd been developing on the side. At some point during the evening, someone asked about his family background, his support system. Derek said both his parents had passed away. He said he was essentially self-made, that he'd gotten where he was through scholarships and hard work, with no family foundation beneath him. No family foundation. I sat with that for a long time after Patricia told me. I didn't call Derek immediately. I went to my shop on Livingston Avenue, the first one I ever owned, and I sat in the break room with a cup of coffee. And I thought about what it meant that my son had found it easier to bury me than to explain me. And then he called asking for the cosign. The loan was through an SBA lender his firm had a relationship with. $2.1 million. Structured over 7 years. For operational capital to scale his platform. He'd gotten preliminary approval, but the lender wanted a guarantor with hard assets and strong credit. Derek had neither. His credit score was 591. I found that out later. Mine was 814. I owned 4 properties free and clear, including the main shop building on Livingston, which I'd paid off in 2019 and was independently appraised at $1.3 million. He needed my name on that loan the way you need a foundation under a building. Without it, nothing stood. "Can we meet in person?" he asked. "I want to walk you through the business plan. There's real money here, Dad. This thing is going to work, and when it does, you'll be glad you were part of it from the start." I said yes. I told him to come to the Livingston shop on Thursday at 2 o'clock. I told him to bring Serena. I told him to bring the loan paperwork. What I didn't tell him is what I spent Wednesday doing. I still had access to a joint account Derek and I had opened years ago for emergency purposes, one he'd apparently forgotten about. Through that account, I had enough visibility into his linked profiles to request statements. What I found in those statements is what changed everything from a quiet refusal into something else entirely. In the 14 months before Derek called asking for that cosign, he and Serena had spent $23,000 at a single boutique in Chicago's Gold Coast. They'd taken 4 trips: Lisbon, Tokyo, the Amalfi Coast, Tulum, totaling $81,000 in hotels, flights, and dining. They had a storage unit in Evanston filled with furniture they'd replaced because Serena wanted a different aesthetic for the apartment. That storage unit cost $340 a month and had been running for 2 years. Meanwhile, Derek's startup had burned through its seed round. He'd raised $400,000 from a small group of early believers. Most of it gone in 18 months, on salaries, office space in the West Loop, and a branding agency that charged $60,000 to design a logo. He wasn't broke because the business hit hard times. He was broke because he'd been performing wealth he didn't have while building nothing underneath it. I printed the statements. I put them in a manila folder. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Marcus Webb, who runs the Eastside Vocational Center on Sullivan Avenue. I've known Marcus for 11 years. He started EVC to give young men aging out of foster care the same thing Earl Briggs gave me: a trade, a skill, a reason to show up. They run programs in automotive repair, electrical, HVAC, plumbing. They've placed over 400 graduates in living wage jobs since 2014. Every year I donate $15,000 and send 2 or 3 of my senior techs over to guest instruct. But Marcus had been calling me for 6 months about something bigger. They had an opportunity to buy the building they were currently leasing on Sullivan. The owner was selling and had given EVC right of first refusal, but only until the end of the quarter. Purchase price: $1.1 million. Marcus had secured pledges for $340,000. He needed the rest. I asked him if he could be at my shop Thursday at 1:30, an hour before Derek arrived. The second call was to a woman named Diane Foster, a business reporter at the Columbus Dispatch who had interviewed me twice before, once when I opened the 3rd location, once when I won a small business award from the city. I told her I was making a significant announcement about a real estate transaction and a community partnership, and that there would be a story worth covering. She said she'd be there at 1:45. I slept better that night than I had in months. Thursday morning, I got to the Livingston shop at 7 and worked until noon. I changed the oil on a 2019 Silverado and replaced the brake pads on a minivan belonging to a woman named Cheryl who brought us coffee every time she came in. Normal work. Good work. The kind of work my son had decided was too embarrassing to acknowledge. Marcus arrived at 1:30 with his program director, a young woman named Alicia, and a folder of their own student profiles, graduation photos, employer testimonials, 5 years of outcome data. We sat in my office above the shop floor, the same office where I'd signed the papers to buy this building, and I walked him through what I was planning. Marcus is not a man who cries easily. He got close. Diane arrived at 1:45 with a photographer. I told her to stay in the background until I gave her a signal. She agreed. She had the look of someone who already knew this was going to be more than a real estate announcement. Derek and Serena arrived at 2:03. I watched them from the upstairs window as they parked the leased Audi on the street. Serena looked at the shop the way she'd looked at my work boots at that first meeting. Derek straightened his jacket before he came through the door. He always did that, adjusted himself before entering a room, like he was putting on a costume. They came upstairs and I introduced them to Marcus and Alicia without explaining why they were there. Derek shook Marcus's hand with the kind of polished warmth that means nothing. Serena smiled with her mouth only. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. Derek spread the loan documents out on the table. He'd tabbed the signature pages with small orange stickers. Very organized. Very prepared. He walked me through the business model with the confidence of someone who had practiced the pitch many times, which he had. The platform, the market gap, the revenue projections, the path to profitability by month 30. I let him finish. I asked 2 questions. He answered them smoothly. Then I said, "I know about the dinner in Lincoln Park, Derek." The silence was immediate and complete. Serena looked at her husband. Derek looked at me. "What dinner?" he said. "The one where you told 14 investors your parents were dead. The one where you built your whole origin story on the fact that there was nobody behind you. No family. Nothing. So that everything you achieved looked like it came from pure individual effort." Dad, that's not, I was simplifying. Investors respond to the self-made narrative. It's a framing choice. Framing. That's what you're calling it. It wasn't personal. I needed them to see the business. Not get distracted by what, Derek? By your father? By the man who paid for your education and your suits and your first apartment and has apparently been dead for over a year? He looked at the table. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the 11-year-old who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from baseball practice. Then he straightened his jaw, and the mask came back up. "Dad, I know that hurt you and I'm sorry, but that's separate from this. This is a real opportunity, and I need your help. The loan is solid. The business is sound. You'll be paid back with interest, and you'll have been part of something that worked." I looked at him for a long moment. "You're right," I said. "I do owe someone something. I've been thinking about that a lot since you called." He reached for the signature pages. "But it's not you." He stopped. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the manila folder. I put it on the table between us. Bank statements, credit card records, a printout of the storage unit lease. "Do you want to explain this? Before or after I do?" He looked at the folder and then at me. His expression shifted through several things before settling on something that looked like controlled anger. "You had no right to access those accounts." "Actually, I do. Legally and technically. You left me on that account 6 years ago and never removed me. That was your oversight." Serena put her hand on Derek's arm. "Dad," she said, "we've had some financial challenges, but that's exactly why the company needs to—" "I'm going to stop you right there," I said, "because what's in that folder isn't financial challenge. Financial challenge is what I had when I was 22. Working 2 jobs, trying to save for a hydraulic lift. What's in that folder is $81,000 in international travel and $23,000 at a single clothing store in the same 12 months. You burn through your investors' seed money and let your credit score fall to 591. Derek's face went red. How do you know my credit score? The lender told me. When they called to verify I was a viable guarantor, they mentioned they'd been unable to approve your application independently. I asked why. They told me. That's a privacy they shouldn't have. Maybe not. But they did. And now we're all sitting here with accurate information for the first time. Serena stood up. This is incredibly inappropriate. Whatever family issues you two have, this is a business meeting and this is my building, I said. Every conversation in it is on my terms. She sat back down. I turned to Marcus. Marcus, would you tell my son about EVC? Marcus opened his folder. He spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about the Sullivan building, the right of first refusal window closing in 11 days, the $760,000 gap between what they had raised and what they needed. He talked about the 41 young men currently enrolled in programs there, most of them between 18 and 24, most of them from the same foster system I grew up in. He talked about what owning that building would mean: permanence, stability, the ability to expand capacity from 40 students to over 100. Derek watched Marcus with the expression of someone waiting for a meeting to end. When Marcus finished, Derek looked at me. What does this have to do with the loan? Nothing, I said. I'm not signing the loan, Dad. I'm donating the Livingston building to EVC instead. The room got very quiet. I gave the signal to Diane. She stepped forward with her photographer. Serena grabbed Derek's arm. He stood up so fast his chair scraped back against the floor. What did you just say? I've had my attorney prepare the transfer documents. Once I sign them, this building appraised at $1.3 million transfers to the Eastside Vocational Center as an irrevocable charitable gift. EVC will sell it to fund the Sullivan Avenue purchase, which covers the full gap in their capital campaign with room left over for program expansion. You can't do that. Derek's voice had gone strange, high and tight. That's your primary asset. You've lost your mind. I opened the transfer documents. My attorney, a woman named Sandra Cho, who had driven over from her office on High Street, stepped out from the corner where she'd been standing quietly. She placed 3 copies on the desk. Derek, I said, I want to ask you something. Don't sign anything until I talk to you alone. When you told those investors your father was dead, what did you think that made you? What story did you think you were telling? It was strategy. It was shame. You were ashamed of me, of where we came from, of what I do and how I built it. His jaw was tight. You don't understand the environment I'm operating in, the people I need to impress. You show up in work clothes with grease under your fingernails, and you think that plays well in a room full of venture capital. It plays exactly as well as the truth should. And the truth is that you went to school on money I made with these hands, in this building, wearing exactly these clothes. Serena made a sound, a short, clipped sound, and said, No one is saying your work isn't admirable, but Derek has built something completely different, something that operates at a different level. And part of building at that level is understanding your audience, and I looked at her steadily. My audience right now is 41 young men on Sullivan Avenue who are going to learn a trade in a building that belongs to them. That's the only audience I'm interested in today. Diane's photographer was moving quietly around the room. Derek finally noticed. Why is there a reporter here? Because I asked her to come. Because what happens in this room today should be part of the public record. Derek turned to Diane, his voice suddenly measured and smooth, the investor pitch voice dropping back into place. I'd appreciate if you didn't run anything about internal family matters. This is a private conversation. Diane looked at her notebook and said nothing. I picked up the pen. Dad. Derek stepped toward the desk. Don't. Just stop for 1 second and think about what you're doing. That building is your retirement. It's the anchor of everything you built. You can be angry at me, fine, but don't blow up your own financial security to prove a point. I thought about that. I actually considered it, standing there with the pen in my hand. because he wasn't entirely wrong. The Livingston building was my anchor. And then I thought about Earl Briggs, who'd taken a chance on an 18-year-old with $40 and no last name anyone recognized. And I thought about what my life would have looked like without that building on Morse Road where I'd learned to pay attention. I signed the first copy. Derek slammed his hand flat on the desk. The coffee cups jumped. Serena said his name sharply. Marcus reached out and touched the signed page like he needed to confirm it was real. I signed the second copy. "Those kids on Sullivant don't need you," Derek said. His voice had dropped into something cold and controlled. "Those programs produce workers for other people's companies. Entry level. Replaceable. Nobody in my world is going to give a career to someone who learned to change brake pads in a donated building on the south side." The room went still. Marcus looked at him. Alicia looked at him. Diane's pen stopped moving. I signed the third copy. "I'd like you to say that again," I said quietly. Clearly, for the record. Derek heard himself. I watched it happen the moment he understood what had just come out of his mouth. In this room, with these people, in front of a camera. His face changed. "That came out wrong," he said. "I didn't mean." "You meant exactly that," I said. "You meant that the work those young men will do doesn't count. That the kind of life I built doesn't count. That anything built with hands instead of pitch decks isn't worth acknowledging. That's what you've believed for a long time. It just took the right room to say it out loud." Serena took Derek's arm, and he let her pull him toward the door. "This isn't over," he said. "For me it is," I said. They left without saying anything else. I heard the Audi start on the street below. Sandra gathered the signed copies and handed one set to Marcus. She said the transfer would be recorded with the county within 48 hours and the funds would be available to EVC within 30 days, well inside the right of first refusal window. Marcus held the papers and looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Robert, I have watched you write checks to our program for 11 years. I have never once doubted that you meant it. But this—" "I know," I said. "These kids are going to know your name." I shook my head. "I want the building named after Earl Briggs. He's the one who actually did this, 40 years ago. I'm just passing it on." Diane published the story 2 days later. It ran on the front page of the business section. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 television stations. By evening, it was running nationally on a handful of outlets that cover philanthropy and small business. The angle they all led with was the same. Local business owner donates flagship property to vocational program for foster youth after son requests. Co-sign for failing startup. My phone did not stop. My daughter-in-law's mother called from Connecticut. She did not call to thank me. She said I had embarrassed the family with a public spectacle, and that whatever conflict existed between Derek and me should have been handled privately, the way people of standing handle these things. I told her that people of standing, in my experience, mostly handled things in ways that protected their reputation rather than their integrity, and that I'd chosen integrity. She hung up. My old foreman from the Earl Briggs days, a man named Glenn who'd retired to Arizona, sent me a text that just said, "Earl would have loved this." I kept that one. Derek's startup did not recover. The angel investors, having read the dispatch story and having done the math on the personal spending versus the seed capital burn rate, requested an accounting audit. 2 of them withdrew their commitments. Without the cosign and without investor confidence, the $2.1 million loan never closed. By the following spring, the company had formally dissolved. About 4 months after the signing, I got a call from Serena. I was surprised enough that I almost didn't answer. She wanted to tell me that she and Derek were in couples therapy. She said it with the careful tone of someone who had rehearsed the sentence many times. She said their therapist had told Derek he needed to address the conversation in the shop not just with her, but with me. She said Derek wasn't ready to call yet, but that she wanted me to know it was coming. I told her I appreciated her calling. I meant it. 3 weeks later, Derek called. He didn't go straight into an apology. That wasn't his way. And I didn't need it to be. He started by asking about the shops, about the new Westerville location we were building out. I told him it was coming along. He asked if I still had the same crew at Livingston. I told him we'd moved the crew to a leased facility 2 blocks over while the building transfer was finalized and it was working fine. Then he was quiet for a moment and he said, "What you said about Earl Briggs, the man who taught you. I'd like to hear more about him sometime." I said there was a lot to tell. He said, "I think I understand now what you were trying to show me in that room. I don't think I understood it then. I thought you were punishing me. I'm starting to see that you were showing me something instead." I said, "There's a difference between helping someone and enabling them to keep being someone they don't want to be." He was quiet again. Then, "Did you know you were going to do it? Before I called asking for the loan, were you already planning it?" "No," I said. "I was planning to say no and leave it at that. It was what you said about your father being dead that changed things. Because if I was dead, there was nothing to protect. And if there was nothing to protect, there was no reason not to do the thing I'd been putting off for 6 months." He said, "The building. You'd been thinking about it for 6 months?" "I'd been thinking about it for 11 years, I told him. "Marcus had been calling me about that building for 6 months. I just needed a reason to stop waiting." He didn't say anything for a while. I could hear him breathing, careful and deliberate, the way he'd breathe before a hard conversation since he was a teenager. "Dad," he said finally, "I told those investors you were dead because I was ashamed. I know that. I'm not going to dress it up. I was ashamed, and I thought it was easier than explaining. And I'm sorry. Not because of the building or the loan. I'm sorry because you didn't deserve that, and because the man you are is not a man anyone should be ashamed of. You're the only self-made person I actually know, and I spent 2 years pretending you didn't exist. That's on me." I said, "I know it is, and I love you anyway. But I'm done funding the version of yourself you've been trying to build. When you're ready to build the real one, I'm here." He said, "I'm working on it." I believed him. 7 months after the signing, I drove out to Sullivant Avenue on a Saturday morning. The closing on the building had gone through in the spring. Construction on the renovations had taken most of the summer. Marcus had sent photos, but I hadn't wanted to see it in person until it was finished. It was finished. The sign above the entrance read Earl Briggs Vocational Center. New windows, new roof. The parking lot repaved. Inside, the shop floor had 12 bays, 3 times what they'd had on the old premises with current equipment. Proper ventilation. 2 lifts that still smelled like factory oil. Alicia walked me through the facility. She showed me the electrical classroom, the HVAC lab, the small library with career resources, and a corner of second-hand couches where students could sit between sessions. She showed me the new intake room where kids aging out of foster care could meet with a counselor and get placed in the program within 2 weeks of their 18th birthday instead of the 6-month wait they'd had before. There were 63 students currently enrolled. They had a waiting list for the spring cohort. One of the students working in Bay 4 recognized me from the news coverage. He was 19, named Andre, working on a transmission teardown with the focused patience of someone who had decided this was the thing he wanted to understand completely. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and shook my hand and said, "My counselor told me about you, about what you did." I told him Earl Briggs did it first. I just kept it going. He looked at the sign above the door and then back at me and said, "You think a shop like yours would ever hire someone from here?" I said, "I hired 2 EVC graduates last year. If you finish the program with the certification and you want to interview, call me directly. Here's the number." I wrote it on the back of a business card. He took it carefully, like it was something he didn't want to lose. On the way back to my car, I sat in the parking lot for a while with the engine off. I thought about $40 and a bus pass. I thought about Earl's shop on Morse Road. The smell of gear oil and brake dust. The sound of an impact wrench in the morning. I thought about my son and how far apart we'd gotten and how far there still was to go, and how that distance was not the same as being lost. I thought about what it cost to tell the truth in a room where the truth is inconvenient. Not much, it turns out. Considerably less than the alternative. I started the car and drove back to the shop. There was a Silverado with a misfiring cylinder waiting for me and a full afternoon of honest work ahead, and that was enough. That has always been enough.